Hello, everyone, and Merry Christmas! Welcome to God and All Things. I'm Tori.
And I'm Cariana.
And today it is Christmas Day when this is going
Woo!
up. And we are, of course, discussing A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, the quintessential Christmas story that a lot of others are based on, including The Grinch, if you think about it.
Huh.
This is like the OG of the grumpy, hate Christmas miser.
Yeah.
Who is transformed
It's true.
into a better person.
And we are Victorian fans and Dickens fans, so
yes.
it had to be.
Meant to be. So let's start off with a brief little summary given by Cariana, and then we'll discuss some personal experiences.
Okay, so probably all of you, at least most of you, know the basic story of A Christmas Carol, but Ebenezer Scrooge is a mean and selfish old man who refuses to show kindness to anyone, whether stranger, associate, or even family. Fortunately for him, he receives a surprise visit from an old business partner who reminds him of what kind of reward awaits those who lack charity, as well as the fact that we all have the chance to change our ways.
Wonderful, nice little short synopsis of that.
For a short
personal
book.
experiences, yes, it's a very short book. So, if you haven't read it, it really doesn't take
My
that
copy
long.
is literally
So
68 pages.
There's also a million audiobooks read by celebrities.
A free one on Audible by Hugh Grant. So we love free.
There's
and we love Hugh Grant.
Free one by Tim Curry as well.
Love Tim Curry and love free. So
yes, so good stuff. But as far as personal experiences go, so I grew up like many other people watching adaptations of it. Muppets Christmas Carol, of course, was a staple of my childhood, and then I
can't see her shirt. It's
you can't see it very well. If you're
on
video,
YouTube, you can kind of see it.
It is wherever you find love, it feels like Christmas.
She sang it for me a minute ago. You guys are missing out.
Yes, you missed my lovely singing. Actually, it was probably recorded because I think everything was on at that point. So, yeah, the thumbnail does not have the shirt on me. We filmed the thumbnail before I realized that I needed to change. So, but usually we're all covered up by words anyway on our thumbnail, so it's fine. Anyway, so yes, I saw a lot of adaptations. I didn't actually read the book until sometime in high school, I think. Although I will say I actually received a copy of it in 3rd grade. Actually, we had like this, like my teacher would do random kind of like book receiving, giving kind of things where it would be like musical chairs and like when you landed on a certain one, like that was the book you got or whatever. And I got A Christmas Carol back then and I never read it after that until I was a lot older. But I think part of it was just I didn't totally understand the Victorian language at that point. It was intimidating. So I read it when I was older, and honestly, I think just because I had seen so many adaptations, I was just like, yep, that was A Christmas Carol. Like, it just didn't surprise me in any way or anything, which, is fine. And then I reread it again. So, backtrack. There's this book called Jacob T. Marley that was written a few years ago. That is Jacob Marley's perspective on A Christmas Carol, and I loved it. I was like, it's so good. The author did a great job writing sort of Dickensian. So it had that same kind of whimsical magic that Charles Dickens has, but they also were members of the church, so they kind of incorporated a little bit of doctrine into it, but still remaining true to the original story. And then it explores Marley's growth in the afterlife, in the spirit world, basically. Wow. So while Scrooge is experiencing his growth, Marley's there to watch, even though Scrooge can't see him. But then the spirits end up working with him and taking him on his own journey as well, to go back in time and see all the different things that he missed.
Because it is kind of the big thing that this is missing, right? Is that Marley, it's like you get the sense that it's too late for him, and we know that that's not necessarily true.
And then it has this beautiful scene at the end where like when Scrooge dies, like they meet in the spirit world, and it's actually so good.
What the heck?
Freaking
Now I
love
want to
it.
read it. Okay.
You should. It's not even very long either, so I love it. Anyway, so I read that, and then I reread A Christmas Carol, and I was actually kind of disappointed because I was like, why is Jacob T. Marley actually like more interesting to me? Maybe it's just because we don't obviously have all the adaptations, but this time around, I think I went into it with more of a just to enjoy the original story, the classic story, and Dickens's writing, and then also approaching it with more of a focus on the change that Scrooge goes through and the power of Christ in his life. I ended up enjoying myself a lot more this time than I have in the past reading it. So yeah, I really liked it. I think it's enjoyable. It's not like a groundbreaking story, obviously. I mean, it was at the time, but for us nowadays, not so much. But I do love Dickens's writing, and it's it's an enjoyable experience to read.
Yeah, I don't know. We didn't like grow up watching a lot of Christmas movies, and so I knew the story, but honestly, like couldn't actually name an adaptation that I've seen for you. Like I guess one that I remember, like a Donald Duck one that comes to mind.
Yeah,
that comes to mind.
The Mickey Mouse one.
Yeah. But that's like the only one that I really have any specific memory of. So I don't like, I knew the story, but like I don't know. It was never a big thing for me. Yeah, I saw at Hale Center Theater, they do it every year, right? And my stepmom actually has a friend who she used to act with, who has played Scrooge in it for like the past 7 years or something crazy like that. Maybe not 7, but but for a while. And so we went and saw him in it, and I was kind of like, I was just bored a lot of the time. I was like, I really just don't know if this is my favorite story. And then I saw The Man Who Invented Christmas, which is about Dickens writing it, for anybody who doesn't know. And I thought that one was interesting, but it was also kind of like a letdown to me. It just like wasn't everything that I wanted from it. And then I finally, a few years ago, I did a temp job around Christmas time doing like packaging for like, like gift wrapping for the Christmas season at a company. And so I got on my parents' Audible account and just like listened to all of the Christmas stories that they had on there while I was doing this gift wrapping. And I listened to A Christmas Carol because I was like, dang, I've never read this. What the heck? I need to. And I kind of felt, I love Dickens's writing as well. I love the way that he structures sentences and his word choices. And so I loved the writing behind it. But I remember feeling the same thing. I was like, this just isn't my favorite, It's just never been my favorite story. I've never really connected with it. And so going into it this time, I would actually agree that it was a lot more enjoyable for me this time around. When I started reading it, I was telling Tori this before, but when I started reading it, I was actually bored out of my mind. Like reading the first chapter, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to be reading this right now. So I switched over to listening to it. And listen to the chapters 2 through 4, focusing on Christ, and it changed a lot of it for me because like I didn't recognize before that actually is the underlying focus of the story. Like I never quite picked up on the fact that Dickens is talking about coming to Christ and being Christ-like. Because he references one time like what the 3 wise men were searching after, right? And there's like a couple of like vague references to it, and so it was just enough for my mind to kind of like either skip over it or for me to just not remember that was in it, because it's never hugely brought out in the adaptations. I think that aspect of it kind of gets glossed over. So yeah, that actually changed it a lot, like recognizing that Dickens is telling people to come to Christ and be more Christ-like, and looking at the way that Scrooge changes, which obviously we'll talk about, so I won't get into that. But looking at the way that he changes, I was like, okay, no, this is pretty cool. This is pretty awesome. Yeah. So I still don't know. Reading it, I just don't know. For some reason, I just don't connect with the story in a way that it's super enjoyable for me to read. But maybe one day I'll be older and wiser and love it more.
Believe in it, like it more, connect with it more.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into our gospel principle, which of course is going to be focused around the atonement and repentance by extension. And so I'm going to very briefly introduce that topic. I feel like we're going to hit on it very hard in this discussion because it's all throughout this whole story. So we are taught in the scriptures that without the atonement of Jesus Christ, we must unavoidably perish. It is through him and his power that we have the chance to change, to overcome, to press forward in the purposes God has for us. In all things, we have become more than conquerors through him that loved us. And we get to explore how we're able to be transformed by Christ through A Christmas Carol. So,
what is that quote from? More than conquerors through him that loved us.
It is Romans 8.
Romans 8.
Okay. I believe. Let me just make sure I'm looking at the right. I have like multiple scriptures pulled up, but I'm like, wait, yes. Romans 8:37. Starting with the very beginning, a very good place to start. Going back to Sound of Music again. All right, Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. And then he goes into his whole spiel about how there's nothing particularly dead about a doornail. Oh, Dickens.
Yeah. Paragraph 2.
So great.
Rambling about doornails.
Yes. And then he talks about how a coffin nail might be a better way to say it, but he wasn't in charge of the English language, so
if you don't love Dickens, I really don't know what to do with you.
How can you not find that paragraph hilarious?
You just have to not take it seriously. That's the key.
Exactly.
If you're like, I don't understand Dickens, like when I read Dickens, I'm like, what is going on here? The answer is nothing. Just read and enjoy.
Just the man likes
Pro
to
tip.
Waffle on.
Yeah.
And
He just likes to talk.
Yeah. Make all sorts of commentary that is just ridiculous.
And if you really don't understand something, probably just skip it and you're fine.
Yeah. You'll probably be all right.
There's our pro tips. Pro tips for reading Dickens. We want you to read Dickens.
Yes, do it. It's amazing. So yes, thus we enter the world of A Christmas Carol, and we get to know Scrooge in this first chapter. The first chapter is about Marley's ghost. So we start off
That's what
getting
it's called,
to know.
even.
Yes, look at that. So we see Scrooge end up just kind of being a horrible person. It's Christmas Eve, and we see, I think, one of the most telling portions about like how deep his just terrible nature is at this point and selfish nature is with his nephew.
100%.
For sure. So his nephew comes in. His nephew apparently isn't very rich in any way. He's pretty poor, but he comes in and he's just very friendly with this uncle, but Scrooge is giving him nothing. He's just constantly like, why are you so happy? You have no reason to be happy. Get over it. And the nephew like throws it back at him and is like, you seem to have every reason to be happy. If wealth is what matters to you, why aren't you happy? Like, you clearly aren't.
Which is kind of beautiful.
Yeah. So well done. But he does it in such a like kind way, like in just a very friendly and loving way of just like, you're my uncle and I care about you and I wish that you would be happier. And I think it's
everything
interesting
about the nephew is so good.
It's interesting that he's coming from this place where like his mom died and who knows what happened to his dad. We assume he probably is gone or dead too,
right?
And so really all he has is this uncle who is just super awful to him and doesn't care about him, but he still hangs on to that and recognizes that Scrooge, like he's all Scrooge has too. So he's just very compassionate and charitable in this moment, and I think it's so impressive. I would say that's the one thing about A Muppet's Christmas Carol that I hate, is the nephew comes across as very kind of overly teasing and sarcastic in this scene, and I'm like, it just seems like he's being very flippant with Scrooge instead of like this scene being a moment where you can see this familial tie that should be so important to both of them,
right?
That he's doing his best to try to keep alive as much as he can.
Yeah, I love the line Scrooge says good afternoon in a sense of like, leave my shop, goodbye, right? And the nephew says, I want nothing from you, I ask nothing of you, why cannot we be friends? And I'm like, oh my gosh. And then Scrooge just repeats good afternoon. And then we hear from the nephew later in a later chapter, you know, he says like, I don't care what my uncle says or does. Every year on Christmas, I will go and I will invite him to our Christmas dinner.
Yes.
And I just, yeah, I love him and his just kind of his recognition of what does matter.
Yeah.
And his insistence on keeping to that and keeping Christmas and truly keeping that Christmas spirit.
Yeah. And I think it's so amazing too, because we live in a world where it's so like cut bad, negative people out of your life all the time. And I think
toxic people.
Yes,
yeah, get rid of them.
Get rid of them. And it's like, but that's just not how Christ would handle it.
Right.
He would just keep trying as much as he can.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good sign of Christ's love for us, of him just constantly being there, inviting us, trying to bring us in. It's just us that stands in the way of that relationship being there.
For sure. We do not want to condone any kind of abuse with that statement, just to the point of saying toxic can kind of be a buzzword these days. And, you know, if you're in a relationship that is bad for your genuinely bad for your welfare and you need to leave it to be safe, then, you know, that's between you and God and what you need. But yeah, if you're just like, that person doesn't make me happy all the time, you know, like maybe think about that again.
They're so negative. Like, okay,
so be the positive light in their life.
Never like he's never abusive to the nephew.
Right, the nephew's not being hurt because he's in his life.
Like it's his life,
maybe emotionally, you
emotionally, know, for sure.
Obviously, when you open yourself up to somebody like that, like there's a level of vulnerability, but like he's fine.
Yes. Yeah. It's not like Scrooge is calling him names all the time or harassing him or anything like that. Or
causing physical harm to him.
It's coming from a place of he just doesn't care and he just thinks poorly of people. And the nephew just does the best he can with that, which I think, it's admirable. So powerful.
It's admirable. Yes. Christ did not live his life constantly in comfort and surrounded by people who adored him.
Yeah.
So
far from it.
far from it.
So there are a few other instances we won't go too deep into of him just kind of showing that he is very self-centered and focused and just is not happy himself, and he does nothing to try to help other people feel any sort of happiness, including his poor clerk, Bob Cratchit, who he treats very poorly. So I wanted to bring that up because obviously he comes in more later. So there's a side note. We know Bob Cratchit.
Yes.
He's terribly treated by his employer.
He'll definitely, more about him will come up.
For sure.
But yeah, Scrooge is definitely, he's not a good person.
No.
That's, the beginning makes that very clear, and you have to, like he's not a good person.
Yes.
Period, the end.
He's just not, for sure. So there's that, and then he goes home that night. It's like I said, Christmas Eve. He goes home, and that's when we have the scene with Marley's ghost. He like sees him on the door knocker, and it really creeps him out, of course. And it's kind of a fun little scene that he's just like, did I really see that? But he's like, he's not a superstitious kind of person. Like, you just can automatically sense that from him. So that's why he's probably extra, just like, like he's questioning everything about himself. Yeah. And there's also, this is a side note, but I really loved it because it's not in any of the adaptations. And so reading it, I was like, what? Why is this in here? I mean, I know why it's in there. It's just extra beautiful foreshadowing where it talks about him walking up the staircase and it being wide enough for a hearse. Oh. And then it's like, maybe that's why it kind of looked like the shadow of a hearse was going up in front of him. And I was like, that was so delicious.
Interesting.
Dickens.
I didn't even think about
just this great foreshadowing of like.
It's almost like the idea of the spirits like setting it all up. They're like setting the night up for him.
Getting prepared of just like you, and even beyond just like what's going to happen with the spirits, but also like right now his future is he is going to die tonight. Like that, this is the night where in the morning, like he's going to be passing away on Christmas Day. And so it's like so great that he's like following a hearse. The hearse is going before him up the stairs. I was
super interesting.
That was so great. Why is this never in the adaptations I've seen? But it just has a shadowy hearse going up. Wonderful. So anyway, so yes, we have the Marley ghost. He comes in and basically explains to Scrooge all about how the afterlife works, that they're going to carry a chain that they forged in life, which I really love too, is very...
that imagery.
Yeah, just reflective of we create our own trials most of the time. I mean, you know, when it comes to sin, I should say, obviously just life causes trials, but, you know, we can often cause our own trials, especially in the next life. We're causing our own suffering if we're not willing to repent and take Christ's power upon us to transform us. And that's Marley never let himself be transformed before he passed. And so in some ways, even though it's hard to fully understand how the spirit world will work, and clearly Dickens was coming from a perspective of not having that full understanding of the next life with the plan of salvation, he's still portraying this idea of people paying for their sins, but there kind of is this sense that maybe it is possible to move past that, that for a while they have to be suffering for those sins, and then they move on to another level. It doesn't outrightly say that, but it kind of gives some hints there, which is very much how the plan of salvation works, is that carrying that as long as you need to suffer and pay for them, and then you'd move on to your kingdom of glory or whatever. So I really like that little hint that there's always hope still, but I love that Marley doesn't even want Scrooge to have to go through what he's going through right now. He wants him to get as strong of an opportunity to change now as possible. And I think it's just a wonderful showing of how with our friends we can really make that impact of helping them to have opportunities to change as well, and loving them through that.
Yeah, I really love that imagery, which is why I talked about it in the summary. You know, the reward that awaits us is the reward that we earn and create, you know, and if you create a chain, then that's your reward. And I really love that it specifically says that his chain is made of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. Because it's just super interesting to think like those were his vices and his sins, and it makes it really, really personal and relatable, you know, in the sense of like, what is my chain? Like what am I forging and creating in myself? What am I focusing on or idolizing? You know, what are the things that are pulling me down and that are going to affect me in the afterlife, that are affecting me now and will continue to affect me in the afterlife? I thought that was super interesting.
And even just thinking about, like, it's the stuff that you put value on in your life. Like, it's kind of like this, okay, this is what you want, then here, have it.
It's all yours.
Yeah, and it just weighs him down. It doesn't actually help him. Whereas if you're focused on better things, then you don't have those same weights.
Right.
If your value is elsewhere.
Right. So. Christ's yoke is easy and his burden is light, right? So if that's your focus, then that's your reward.
Yes, exactly. One other quick little note I do, and I kind of hinted at this already, but I really love in the book, and I think sometimes it's brushed over when people discuss A Christmas Carol, is the fact that Marley says it's an event of my procurement. Like, he's the one who made it happen. And I think there's power in that, too, of recognizing, like, it wasn't just these spirits that were like, we should help Scrooge out. Like, Marley was like, please, can we help my friend? Because I don't want him to suffer what I'm suffering. And I think that's also just a beautiful show of friendship, which is why that book, Jacob T. Marley, is amazing. Because it addresses, like, this idea of he procured it, he made it happen. He kind of makes this deal with the spirits. And in that book, it kind of makes it like he talks to a whole bunch of spirits and is like, please, is there anything we can do? And he just hears the voices of 3 different spirits who say, we'll help you. And it ends up being the Christmas spirits that come in and help him out. But I really love that line, and I think it just shows so much, not only about the opportunity we have to play a role in each other's journeys with Christ, but also just the power within the story, the power of the friendship between Marley and Scrooge. Like, I think it's easy to ignore the fact that they were really good friends, even though they were both terrible people. Like, they have this relationship where Marley is thinking about him in the afterlife when he's wandering the earth. And I really, really like that. So anyway, moving into the next chapter, unless you had any other thoughts that you wanted to share. Okay, perfect. So chapter 2 is the first spirit, the ghost of Christmas past, which is a very interesting spirit. And I always have such a hard time imagining the spirit. And I think in adaptations, he's the one that is so different in every adaptation, the way people portray him.
Which is fair.
Because he's the most difficult to, like, imagine.
Yeah.
The other two are, like, a big Santa, basically, and the creepy, like, Grim Reaper kind of character.
They're pretty clear cut.
Yeah, exactly.
This one is, like, he looks young, but he's also old, and his face changes, and sometimes he has some limbs, and sometimes he doesn't. It's like, what the crap does this guy look like? Horrifying. That's what it looks like. Yes. No wonder Scrooge was scared into compliance.
Yep. They're like, better listen. Anyway, so I really like this chapter. I honestly think on this reread, this was probably my favorite part. I mean, the other two are great too, obviously, for their own reasons, but I think it's just never stood out to me as much exploring his past. But I really, really liked it this time. I guess part of it is, I mean, I'm not old, obviously, but I feel like I'm reaching more of a point where I'm fully in adulthood. And so maybe it's just I'm more self-reflective about some of these things than I used to be, and maybe that's why it stands out to me more this time. But I really like the idea of, I mean, Christ says, "Come to me as a little child," right? And so I think sometimes there is power in remembering what it was like to be a child and to remember the feelings you had in your youth in regards to love, to your relationship with Christ. And I think sometimes as adults we overcomplicate things, so seeing things through the simple purity of a child's eyes is very empowering. And I really like in this chapter, we already get to see that Scrooge has a part of him that is good. Like, it's always been there, because within this first ghost, he automatically is like, oh, he's having moments, and this is never in adaptations. I was telling Karyana about this, and I'm so sad that it's not, because I think it's so beautiful and shows a lot about his process of change. But he mentions a couple times where he starts to say something and he stops and the spirit's like, what were you gonna say? And one of the times it was like, oh, there was a little boy who was singing carols at my door and I wish I had given him something. Or he says, oh, I just was thinking about my clerk and wishing that I could say something to him. And so you're already seeing these little moments of him realizing, like, feeling that purity and simplicity again, and wishing that he could have applied that to the day before and been more gentle and more caring to the people around him. And I just love that it just goes to show that Scrooge is much more complex than sometimes I think we make him out to be, which is what Christ is able to build off of. That there's always that little smidgen of good somewhere in someone that Christ is able to magnify if we let him.
We all have the light of Christ in us, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would add to that as well, like, he sees the Christmas party, right? He's an apprentice, and he apprentices under a phenomenal boss who teaches him about what is important. And you have to wonder where that transition happens between, you know, being with somebody who's so good to, like, then it, like, transfers to he had the gleam of greed in his eye that, like, became where the tree grew from. And I'm like, what happened in between? But but anyway, so you have this big Christmas party and the spirit is like, why were you so happy? He spent like 3 or 4 pounds on this. Like, it did not cost him anything to do this. And Scrooge is automatically like, that's not what it was about. Like, he understands that. He recognizes that it doesn't take a lot of money, and it wasn't about what was spent on him. It was the kindness and the goodness that was showed to him. And so he has that understanding in him. It's not like he's ignorant of the fact that you can spread kindness without it costing a bunch of money, and that's not what actually matters in life.
I also, kind of a little bit of a tangent, but I thought it was really interesting seeing the story of Belle a little bit in this. Belle is the woman that Scrooge ends up falling in love with, and they get engaged, and then she ends up calling it off because he starts becoming the greedy self that he becomes, and she sees that and is like, I don't want this. This is not what I got engaged to, and I want something more for myself, and I know you don't actually want this either, and I'm not going to tie you down. And so she leaves, and we end up getting to see, this is another thing that's not in a lot of adaptations, but we get to see her older. And I love that it's just a little sign that her life wasn't ruined because of the agency of another. Like, just because something that could have been amazing, like, there's every chance if Scrooge hadn't become the man he became, that they could have gotten married and been very happy. And she probably would have been just as happy as she ended up being with this other man. But Scrooge didn't choose that path. But that didn't stop her from having that joy and having a family that she wanted and a man that she trusted and cared about. And so I really appreciate just that little hint that God's plan for us works with and despite the choices of other people, and sometimes even our choices, as long as we're willing to come back from that. And I think that's just a good reminder that it's okay. It may not work out exactly the way it could have, but that doesn't mean that joy can't be yours just because of this one thing. I
love that. Yeah, Scrooge could have been her plan, and if he had chosen a different path, then she could have stayed with him, and it could have been her plan. But because he chose a worse path, she was there was another plan that worked out just as well for her. That is a really powerful message.
So then we move into spirit number 2, which is the ghost of Christmas Present, who is the jolly one, and we love him.
This was definitely my favorite section.
Yes. I think usually this is my favorite section. Plus this is a section in Muppets Christmas Carol where they sing the song that's on my shirt. So we do love that. It's a joy. So anyway, moving into Spirit 2, and I have a little bit more marked specific quotes in this part. So the first one being the first interaction that we have with the Ghost of Christmas Present, where he says, come in and know me better, man. I think that just screams Jesus. Yes. Come in and know me better, man.
Yes.
And so I'm like, I just love that that jolly invitation of like, come on, come in. Like, the door's open, you're good to come in. And he walks in and he sees this spirit who's big and jolly, and there's lights and decorations. And the Ghost of Christmas Present is wearing like a scabbard with no sword. That's all rusted, showing that just peace and like just a peaceful welcome, but still a sense of power. And I really love, like, we see the spirit of Christmas past, and that spirit is very like reflective and a really good listener. Like, throughout that first part, you see a lot of like good active listening by the past. And then you see Ghost of Christmas Present, who is jolly and happy and welcoming. And I feel like both of those are just different aspects of Christ that we're seeing and getting introduced to him a little bit more.
It is interesting too, though. I don't know where I would fit this in on the aspects of Christ, but the Ghost of Christmas Past feels, just thinking about like that welcome and like come in and come know me better, right? Just going, like, we were talking about the description of the Ghost of Christmas Past, and he's a little bit unknowable, which is just kind of interesting to think about with the past, is that we can reflect on it and try to understand it and apply it, but it's not completely knowable. There are things that we're missing. There are things that we don't understand. I think that does apply to Christ a little bit, like there is something uncomprehendable about a godly being, right? And somebody that we haven't met in person necessarily. And I think it's part of why we get to like constantly be striving to come to know him better. So I think, I would say that there's something a little bit unknowable and ununderstandable about the Ghost of Christmas Past and Christ. But then I like the comparison as well to him saying, come and get to know me better, and welcoming us in to come and understand him.
Yes. And I think, I mean, going, not necessarily connecting directly with Christ, but just with the idea of past and present. Like with past, it's unknowable, and like we're not supposed to stay there.
Right.
We're not supposed to be there.
It's supposed to be far away.
We are supposed to be in the present.
Yeah.
So the Ghost of Christmas Present being the one that's welcoming in and like, come in,
Yes,
know
you can
me
see
better.
him really well.
Like that's where we're supposed to be existing and
Yeah.
really trying, is in the present, not in the past. And we shouldn't be too worried about the future. We need to be welcomed in the present and allow ourselves to be.
Yeah. To go ahead a little bit, the future is like shrouded, right? So the past is like far away and distant and unknowable. The future is shrouded, and the present is right here. It is understandable. You can be here and you can be a part of it and see it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the way it's supposed to be, like you said.
So the Ghost of Christmas Present and Scrooge end up having a little conversation where at the very beginning where he's like, the spirit's like, you've never seen the likes of me before. And Scrooge is like, I haven't. Have you many brothers? And he says more than 1,800, meaning all the ghosts of Christmas presents that come since the first Christmas, which is just kind of a fun little throw in there. But one line I really liked on this read through was Scrooge says after this, Spirit, said Scrooge submissively, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learnt a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it. So we already see that he's much more willing to embrace the lessons that he's learning from the spirits. And we didn't really talk about it in here, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, even though it is interesting symbolism. But at the end of the chapter with the Ghost of Christmas Past, he tries to turn the light out on the spirit. And there's kind of a sense in this comment where he regrets that already. He's like, oh, I was being compulsively made to learn that lesson at that time, and I didn't take as good of advantage of it as I should have, so I'm going to try better this time. And so we're already we saw him kind of reflecting and regretting with the Ghost of Christmas Past, and then the Ghost of Christmas Present, he's like, okay, what should I do? So he's already starting to live in that past, present, and future state.
Right. And I love, we'll continue to see that growth as well. Whereas with the future ghost, he's like, you scare me, but I know that this is for my own good. Yes. And it's like the next step, it's not just like, okay, like I know I need to try harder. He moves from it being against his will to I need to try harder to this is for my good and please help me.
Yes. It's amazing.
Yeah. I also do like the line right after that. What you just read is touch my robe. Oh, the spirit tells him to touch his robe, and it just makes me think of the woman with the issue of blood, right? And I don't know, the idea of like the healing power of Christ and how being near him can heal us and help us and teach us in all sorts of ways.
Another aspect, I just like a lot of the descriptions of the Ghost of Christmas Present.
Yes.
And one of the things I liked, again, on this read through was it mentions on page 63 in my copy, I don't know, on other ones.
I only have 68 pages in
like,
my copy.
So we're not going to be there. Anyway, okay, so it says, it was a remarkable quality of the ghost which Scrooge had observed at the baker's, that notwithstanding his gigantic size, he could accommodate himself to any place with ease, and that he stood beneath a low roof quite as gracefully and like a supernatural creature as it was possible he could have done in any lofty hall. And I love that, again, that symbolism of he fits everywhere. He's that spirit of Christmas, and meaning the spirit of Christ, fits everywhere. He can be in the greatest courts of the greatest kings and queens and be there for those children as much as he's in the shacks and on the streets with those who maybe don't feel that love in the same way, but can still feel him there. And it's just such a powerful realization to realize he can be anywhere.
That is awesome. That is not the one I was thinking
of,
but that is awesome. So since we're on the description of the ghost, I'll just I'll just add my last thought on that, even though it's jumping more to the end.
That's all right.
Of the chapter. Yeah, nearer the end of that chapter, of chapter 3, it says, "It was strange too that while Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost grew older, clearly older. Scrooge had observed this change, but never spoke of it until they had left a children's 12th night party, when, looking at the spirit as they stood together in an open place, he noticed that its hair was gray. 'Are spirits' lives so short?' asked Scrooge. 'My life upon this globe is very brief,' replied the ghost. 'It ends tonight.'" And I was like, why? You know, like, that's not for no reason, right? Like,
Yeah.
why is that there? And I'm sure there are lots of interpretations that people could come up with, but one thing I was thinking about was just kind of like, the present is short, you know? The present is like just a moment, right? It's here and it's gone, and it's here and it's gone, over and over again. And the idea, like, this, I don't know, I was just thinking about like life as our our present state is life on this earth, and it's so short. So like the moment you're in right now, the moment that you have the choice between something good, better, or best, or bad, you know, like we have the choice in each moment to make those decisions and to change from one moment to the next, and it's like that, you know. And then over the course of this life, we get old so fast, and this life is so fast, and this is our time to make those choices. And of course we have other chances in the afterlife, but this is where it's easiest, right? This is where we decide who we are and the kind of person that we're going to become. And it's just such a short time. And so I really loved that symbolism of like the ghost of Christmas Present's life passing so quickly, and he spends it blessing people. You know, they just go from house to house. He shows them a couple of specific scenes, but then they go from house to house, anywhere where he's welcomed in. All the connections of this ghost to Christ are amazing. So anywhere he's welcomed in, they just go around blessing people. And I love that he spends his short life in this day of probation just choosing to bless anybody he can who welcomes him. And so, yeah, I just thought that was a really, really interesting symbolism with his appearance, the idea of him getting older really, really quickly, because this is the time that he has, and what he chooses to do with that time.
I really like that interpretation a lot. This is also the chapter where we really get introduced a little bit more to Bob Cratchit and Tiny
Cratchit
Tim.
Oh.
And they're so sweet. And poor Tiny Tim. So sweet. And the part that always makes me cry.
I teared up at Tiny Tim.
Really?
Yep. It's not a normal me thing to do, but I teared up at Tiny Tim.
Oh, but it's so cute. Oh. I know one scene in like the Disney animated adaptation,
that Donald Duck one?
No,
a different one.
The Jim Carrey one, where Jim Carrey's Scrooge.
It's possible I've seen that one. I don't remember.
Yeah, it's one that there's mixed feelings about. There's aspects of it that I do really like, though. But one of the things I like, and that always makes me cry, is when Bob says, Mrs. Cratchit asks how Tiny Tim did at church. And he says, as good as gold and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful sitting by himself so much and thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me coming home that he hoped that people saw him in the church because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see.
That's where I teared up.
Yeah, that's where I always tear up in the adaptation like, too.
Oh my gosh. Oh, this cute, perfect little boy who's going straight to heaven. Seriously. Everybody's Scrooge is so sad about the idea of him dying. I'm like, Scrooge, if that boy dies, he is going straight to God. Yes. I don't like, it'd be way better for him than it would be for you. Seriously. You do not need to be worried about that boy.
Not at all. And it's so cute.
Oh my goodness.
So direction. And it just makes you think, like, I want to make sure I'm living in a way where I can remind people of Christ and who made lame men walk and blind men see.
Yeah, it's a reason I'm a huge advocate. I'm a huge active advocate for talking more about trials and issues within the church, you know, and I try to bring my trials up my self-inflicted and other people and life-inflicted ones all the same, you know, just because we all have them. And so, like, why be ashamed and keep them secret when instead we can use them to empower other people and to remind people of who has helped us through all of those things. Yeah, there's a beautiful scene in The Chosen that I love, and it is around physical ailments, but I think it can be applied to those spiritual ones if we're willing to share them and talk about them as well, where it's one of the additions that they make where it's not necessarily in the Bible, but I think it's James, the
Little
John. Is it Little John who
Yeah.
is his hand is crippled, right? Or
I
his
think
leg?
it's
Does he
his
have
leg.
a limp?
Yeah, because he has that cane thing.
Yes,
Yeah.
he has a
Mhm.
cane. Okay, that's what I was connecting to his hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, Little John. It's been a minute since I've seen it now
yes.
because I'm sitting here waiting for season 4 to come out.
Yes.
But yeah, so he has a cane with a limp, and you know, Christ has performed all of these miracles and healed all of these people, and Little John is never asked to be healed. And I think one of the other apostles brings it up where he's like, why don't you just ask him, you know?
Mhm.
And finally he goes to Jesus and is like, he doesn't ask to be healed necessarily. He just kind of like stumbles over like, why haven't you healed me kind of
Yes.
thing, like why, you know, question we ask all the time, why? And Christ talks to him. He's like just paired them all up to send them on their own missions, and he's like, imagine the effect that you can have on people by bearing your testimony of me. And it's just this beautiful scene where he's like, knowing that I have the power to heal, but not being healed, but still believing in me and testifying of me. Like, imagine the power that will have, and the transforming, the way that you can transform other people's lives and testimonies through that. And that's just what I love, you know, is the idea of being able to use our problems and ailments, whether they're physical or spiritual or mental, whatever they might be, to say, this is a problem and my life isn't perfect and I haven't been healed all the way, but I know that this is true still, and I know that Christ has healing power. I know that he's here for me, and I know that he has helped me regardless. And it's such a powerful message. So anyway, there's my extended Tiny Tim speech.
I love that.
Because it's just
Great.
it's just so beautiful. Yes.
It is.
Okay.
It so is.
I did want to bring up the fact that Bob Cratchit makes a point of toasting Scrooge.
Oh, yes.
I do really, really love that, because we were talking about the nephew, and it reminds me of kind of that gratitude, you know, and he's maybe not as jovial about it as his nephew, because his life is kind of more directly impacted, and he is kind of made miserable because
and
of
he doesn't
Scrooge.
have this relationship that's like meant to be a good relationship
necessarily.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he doesn't have this familial tie, and his life and his family's lives are being directly impacted by Scrooge's frugalness and cruelty. So, you know, so there's a little less joy in it versus the party that his nephew is having. They're all just kind of laughing about Scrooge. Bob Cratchit brings Scrooge up, and his wife gets pretty upset about it, but they're willing to toast to Scrooge's help. And I like that he calls him the master of the feast, you know, because ultimately Scrooge is the one who provided the means for them to be able to come together on Christmas Day. And that's actually another thing, is that Scrooge does give him Christmas off.
Yes.
That is kind of that
Yeah,
initial,
that
he's
sign of
super
there's
grumpy
something.
about it,
Mhm.
but he knows how much it means to Bob Cratchit, and he gives him Christmas Day off, even though he doesn't want to.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I do appreciate that Bob is very grateful for what he does have. And I think that that's really impactful on Scrooge, on recognizing, like, you know, because Scrooge has this attitude of like, you have nothing to be happy about. Like, why are you happy when you have nothing to be happy about? Bob says, well, I do have something. Here it is.
Yeah.
And thank you for it.
Mhm.
And I just think that that's a really, really beautiful and important part that I really appreciated.
Yeah.
There are lots of beautiful and important parts, but that's the one that I'm
Yes.
like, this is the one I need to say.
That's a solid one. Love
Yes.
it. That's so good.
I'll let the rest of them go.
So good. There's just so many good things.
It's so, yeah, especially when you have something so short like this, you know, it's like,
Yes.
wait, no, there's something going on every page.
Yes, and the way Dickens writes just lends
my
itself to a
gosh.
lot of different thoughts and
Yes,
stuff too,
for
which
sure,
is great.
for sure. Don't worry, we've already talked about coming back to it. So.
Yes, we'll definitely do more episodes about A Christmas Carol.
Might be a
I'm
Christmas
sure.
tradition.
Yes, we'll just come back to it again and again.
Yes.
Anyway, so
I know I said that it's not my favorite.
Yes.
That does not mean that there aren't lots of good lessons to be learned from it
Still
and beautiful
good stuff,
things. There's good
sure.
stuff.
It's still Victorian literature.
You know,
with everything in that.
There's so much to get out of Victorian
So
literature.
good. I love it. So then moving into the next part with the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come, who is very different from the first two.
Yes.
And it's always interesting to think about what would the ghost have been like if Scrooge had been a better person and it wasn't like that Yet to Come wasn't so bad. Like if it was more of a good Christmas Yet to Come as of where he was at when he went to bed, basically. But anyway, I think it's interesting thinking back to our conversation earlier about how each ghost kind of represents a different aspect of Christ.
Okay.
When we were having that conversation, I was like, what will I say about the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come? Because he's so dark and scary.
For sure.
But I would say he probably represents the idea of knowledge and wisdom that Christ has. And he changes based on what is needed for the person and what the truth is for that person based on where they're at.
Right.
And so for Scrooge, he's in a position where it's almost like if he doesn't change, God has no further use for him on earth. Like, this is his chance to change. And if he doesn't, then his time on earth is over because God doesn't have...
Interesting.
Is like, okay, your time's up. This is like a big last chance to like make a decision if you want to try to change your life or not.
Yeah.
And
you mentioned that at the beginning and I was like, I didn't read that into it, but that does make sense.
Yeah. He's like, this is your time. And so if you go one direction, you'll get more time because God will have more use for you because you'll be more prepared
something that you can do.
Accomplish things. Yeah. But if you don't, then it's over. And I love that perception of understanding that God gives us as much time as we need to make the best of our lives. And sometimes we don't understand that because obviously there are lives that are lost so soon and tragedies that happen and you just don't know. And so I want to make it clear, like, sometimes we just don't understand what God's plan
We're not claiming to know why somebody close to you passed away too soon.
Yes. Yeah. No. But I think there is a comfort in recognizing that God knows what he's doing with the time he's giving us on this earth.
Yes.
And knows exactly what his plan is beyond that, which it's just very hopeful and empowering.
When you mentioned like what aspects of Christ does he represent, I was like, what came to my mind was the idea of judgment, because we're taught that Christ is our like actual judge in the final judgment, right? As somebody, he's the one who perfectly understands us and has literally experienced everything that we go through. And so he's the one qualified to judge us at the final judgment. And I don't know, like the kind of that Grim Reaper feel, he's like, he gives me the sense of like standing in judgment of Scrooge. He's just like pointing and saying like, this is your end,
the justice side.
Exactly. Yeah, that judge and justice side of how things work. He's standing there saying, this is how it ends, and this is who you are, and this is what you're gonna get. And so and Scrooge is sitting there saying like, I'm a changed man, but he hasn't done anything about it yet, which he hasn't had the chance to. But like at this point, his works haven't changed, and he has like, there's nothing to show that he's actually changed. And so this Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come is kind of standing in this like judgment as of right now. This is where you stand, and that's that kind of feeling. That's another aspect that I would give him.
Briefly on a writing point, I do love in this third part where he's clearly in denial about what's happening, but it doesn't actually say that. Like, you just
because it's
know.
so obvious that it's
you
him.
reading, you're like, obviously it's you, Scrooge. But he just keeps being like, oh, this guy. It will be just like what I'll have to go through and all this stuff. But you, like, know that he knows. He knows how obvious it is, too. He's just scared.
I was thinking about that. I was like, didn't they, like, say your name? Like, how do you not know what's going on right now?
Right? You're like, what in the world?
Yes,
but,
I agree. He's totally in denial.
He's very in denial, but I think it's very telling about, you know, the ghost of Christmas yet to come. It seems like Scrooge has kind of already started to make those changes. Like, we've seen him make comments in earlier chapters.
His heart has changed.
Yeah,
grown
but
3
like
sizes.
As the reader, you're like, okay, why do you have to put this poor guy through this to, like, see his grave? Like, why do we have to get to there? Like, the spirit is very insistent of, like, you have to see. And I realized that like, the whole time he's denying it still, and he's, like, in denial about this and just not wanting to believe that it's him, and it's almost keeping him from actually progressing. Like, he's like, if I just ignore it, it's not, if I just pretend like it's not me, then I don't have to worry about it. But then he has to end up embracing and, like, looking at the grave and accepting that is me, this is what's going to happen, and so I need to change. Like, it needs to become a much more clear, firm decision for him to get the time that God wants to give him, those extra several years that he ends up living on earth, doing good and accomplishing a lot. He needs to have this moment where he actively decides, and all of us have to have that moment, multiple moments.
Yes.
For sure, where we just decide, I am going to follow Jesus. Like, dancing along these different lines is just never going to actually change us. Yeah. And so it's a very clear-cut, Scrooge needs to make the decision. He can't just kind of dance around it and be like, okay, yeah, I probably should do better. Like, ooh, maybe, yeah, I should learn that lesson. Like, it's like, no, you need to do it. You need to go out and change the way you're living. And it's when he does that the vision ends, and he wakes up on Christmas morning and everything's different for him.
Yeah, I like it, where it becomes more than just theoretical, right? I remember growing up in Young Women's, they would always teach us, make the decision beforehand, right? So that when temptation comes, the decision is already made. And I remember, like, growing up as a young woman in the church, I was like, okay, yeah, you know, like, I believe in this. I want to follow the commandments. I'm going to make these decisions. And then as I got older and broke some commandments, I realized, I was like, that doesn't actually work. Like, I can't, when I'm 13 years old, say, I'm never going to do this and make that decision and call it done. That's not actually how it works. You have to constantly be making that decision, and you have to, why? You know, like, Scrooge is almost introduced to, like, the why. Like, here's the consequence. This is why you need to change, right? A why, at least. Yes. And yeah, so that's just something that I definitely am like, if I could go back and, like, teach myself anything as a younger woman, I'd say, like, modify this advice a little bit, you know, like, yes, decide beforehand, of course, but then you have to be firm in that decision. I love the word firm that you used. You have to be firm in that and constantly have it in your heart and as your guide, and understand and know why that decision matters to you, and what you're trying to get towards and what you're not trying to get towards. You have to know your destination to be able to follow that journey. And now he knows the destination of his current journey so that he can change course to a different destination. So that's what I try to encourage people to do, is, like, you know where you're going and adjust to where you want to be going, and constantly be making the decisions to get there. Because just saying, like, oh yeah, I'll do that, you know, like he is at the beginning of this chapter, like, I'm a changed man, I'm going to do things differently. You know? It just doesn't stick, and it doesn't work like that. Yeah. We don't work like that. Our memories are too short. That's why the Ghost of Christmas Present died after a night, because the present's gone. You have to do it again.
Yes. I think that's a great point. Yeah. And then we get to the end of the story where he wakes up Christmas morning and he is a changed man. He is ready to take on the world. I mean, there's like all sorts of, you mentioned the why, he's got all these reasons why he wants to change, and it's all much more solid in his head after the final ghost. And he goes out, and I love so many things about this last chapter.
Yes.
Because, okay, so first of all, he calls down to this boy in the street and is like, what's the day, to have an understanding of what exactly the spirits had done, and they had ended up doing it in one night instead of the 3 like Marley made it sound like. And so he's all excited. Anyway, so he talks to this boy, and I love that, like, in this interaction, he's really nice to the boy and, like, asks for his help in a very friendly way, but he goes beyond that to being, like, very complimentary of the boy. Like, he's
delightful boy.
He's so delightful. He's so smart. What a, like, smart little boy and stuff. Like, he doesn't even know this kid at all. But he's just, and I'm like, I just love that it's so much more personal than just simply like being generally friendly. Like, he's like, no, like, this is like a child of God basically that I'm talking to right now. How cool is that? Like, if we could all have the same attitude about talking to each other and being like, wow,
meeting a person and looking for those amazing qualities.
I'm just loving that. The world would be a better place.
Boy, that just killed me. Yeah, no, it really is. It's awesome.
And he even like says it under his breath, so you know it's like actually just in his heart,
right?
The way he feels,
and it just comes out of him. Yeah.
For face or anything. I just love it. And so that's wonderful. And then he even like leaves the house and like says he loves the door knocker, and just like it will remind him for the rest of his days. Just like these little, he's starting to notice little good details and having that gratitude.
And where it specifically says like he never thought about the door knocker. Like at the beginning when it turns to Marley's face, he says hasn't thought about Marley and he never thinks about his door knocker. And then all of a sudden he's looking at this door knocker and so grateful for it.
Yes. It's amazing that those reminders that he's paying attention to. But amidst all of this, I love that he's still himself. Like, you have him talking to the man who is trying to raise funds for the poor, and he ends up being like, oh, I'll give you this much. We don't know how much, but it's clearly a lot. And the man's like, oh, are you kidding me? And he says there's a whole lot of back payments in that. And obviously, like, it's a sweet thing because he's like, you know, all these years I haven't been donating and doing what I can to help the poor, so now I need to do as much as I can. But it's still like, who says back payments?
It's a business transaction.
Like, he's still him. And then even with like Bob Cratchit, and he's like, I'm going to make sure that he's this much late, and like he's very meticulous.
He shows up to work early the day after Christmas.
Just to be like, look, he's late, to catch him being late and stuff. And so like he still has this like detailed clock mindset and stuff. Like, he still has all of this, he's just like using it in a more positive way. And I really love that. Like, it's not like cool. He changed his whole personality and who he is and how he thinks. He just applied how he thinks and who he is in a much more positive direction, which is like the power Christ gives us. Is we're still us. Like, he wants us to be unique and bring our own strengths and weaknesses to the table. He just will teach us how to use them in a way that will best suit us and all those around us and him and his plan.
Yeah, for sure. I focused in just on the fact that he's positive in the first place. I'm like, isn't it such an amazing aspect of the atonement that if we truly understand it and are using it right, it just brings joy, you know? It makes me think of President Nelson talking about the joy of repentance, where there's just such a, there's such a stigma around the idea of repentance, of it being sorrowful and depressing. And the fact is that sin brings sorrow, right? And repentance brings joy. And so yeah, we just have this sense of like, you think about these ghosts, he kind of just had a traumatizing, awful experience. Like, really, if he were like shaken, knowing how I feel when I wake up after a nightmare where my life is in danger, like, it shakes me for an entire day, and it's hard for me to be in a good mood. And the man just saw his grave and was told, this is your future. If you don't do this, like, he could justify being shaken and being scared and acting out of fear, right? This is a really fearful why for a reason to change. which I feel like is one thing that I would probably adjust about this book and show, because they show a really fearful scene, but then he obviously understands that this is a really joyful change, and I would probably add something in between there of saying like, this is why it's joyful.
Yes.
You know.
Mm-hmm.
That's like one of the one thing that I would adjust, maybe, just to get that across better, because I love that he understands that like it's not scary, and it's not shameful, and it's not guilty, it's not any of those things. It's, I've done things wrong, and that is so unfortunate, and I'm so grateful that I have the chance to continue on, and that's such a good reason to be happy and excited and share that excitement with everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So that joy that he felt was really, really impactful to me.
I love that so much. And it actually transitions well into one of my last points that I have, where I love that he goes to his nephews for Christmas dinner.
Yes.
Like, I just think, because it would have been so easy to be like, oh, the best way he could live his life now is to go along the street and just give all his money to all these poor people and stuff. But, like, part of what Christ, in essence, is trying to teach him is to appreciate the relationships he has.
Yeah.
And so he goes to his nephew's house, but it's not like it's a service to his nephew.
Right.
Like, I mean, in some ways it is, because like we mentioned at the beginning, like this is this relationship that it's the last either of them has as far as family, like blood relatives. But it's also for Scrooge himself. Like that connection is just as much a service to him as it is to his nephew. But it's still within Christ's plan. It's like still a huge part of what we should be doing here, and what will bring us the eternal joy that we're seeking after is being with those we love.
Yeah, just playing games and coming closer together.
Yeah,
and,
building those bonds.
Yeah, no, I do love that. When he recognizes that when he dies, there's not one person who will feel any remorse over it. You know, there will be people who are glad that he's dead, people who are pining after his things, people who are benefited by it financially, but nobody who is sad about it. And yeah, I'm sure that plays a huge part in thinking about those connections that he has. And you know, they don't talk about it, but how could he not be thinking, I have this nephew, like I'm asking this ghost to show me somebody who's sad about me dying, and I have this nephew who comes and visits me and tries to be friends with me, but he's not sad that I passed away, you know. And what does that say about this relationship, and about how much I can almost get away with, right? Yeah, so I agree. I think that is a beautiful point.
One scripture that I wanted to bring up in relationship with all of this and with Christmas and everything is Isaiah chapter 53, verses 3 through 5. It says, "He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he hath borne our griefs, and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed." I love that reminder too, in reference to Scrooge and then to all of us, that Scrooge suffered a lot in his life, and part of that came from his own choices, obviously. And not only did Christ make it possible for him to change, he also understood him completely and understood that a lot of this bitterness and negativity and grumpy, selfish person that he's become came from a place of hurt in some ways, and a place of just suffering through mortal life and having a hard time facing the trials and the temptations that we face in everyday life. And Christ knew how to give him the strength to get past that and overcome that because of the suffering that he suffered. That's how Christ is with all of us. He understands our sorrows and our griefs. And even when we don't care about him or have moments where we maybe forget how much he has done for us, or maybe doubt whether we actually believe in him, those things are still facts. Like, he still understands us. And when the time is right, he will always give us those opportunities that we need to come closer to him and then we can choose to take that on or not. But those opportunities are always there, and that's one of the greatest powers of the atonement, is that we can always change and we can always have the strength to overcome and move forward. So that is everything. So thank you all for watching on this lovely Christmas day. I don't know if you're actually watching or listening to this on Christmas, but even if you're not, we hope you had a wonderful Christmas. Little reminder, of course, to like and subscribe if you are able to on YouTube, and also leaving a review elsewhere if you are listening on Spotify or other places wherever you're listening to podcasts. Also follow us on Instagram if you want information about upcoming things we have going on, as well as just nice little posts on your feed about God and about us. So that will all be there. Also, if you're interested in seeing what I'm reading, you can check that out on the channel Good Strong Words on YouTube. Definitely go over there. And in the end, I think it's only right and fitting to end our little episode here with the words of Tiny Tim. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone. Merry Christmas!
Merry Christmas!